Okay, so this is the video of INTP versus ENTP. So first, dominant TI versus dominant extroverted intuition. When you dominantly use introverted thinking, it means that you internally, most of the time, what you will do, it's the main point of the dominant function, it's what you do most of the time. So most of the time, INTPs will internally analyze things and trying to figure out subjectively, because it's internalized, how to solve these things. So you can compare that with TE to get to see how they are different in that respect. Extroverted thinking, TE, analyzes external things, external topics, and it does it externally, which means that, for example, I will try to understand how that pen, this is a pen, how that pen works, and I will considerate the external systems that can be involved in that pen. For example, there is the ink, how the ink goes in the tube and how it works. You know, this is extroverted thinking, and many people think this is introverted thinking. No, this is not introverted thinking. Extroverted thinking is practical. It wants to analyze things to understand how they work and how they can be improved or used in an external system to build a machine, for example, and make it work. So this is extroverted thinking. Introverted thinking tries to analyze the subject, the internal framework of the person. So they are very introspective individuals, but since it's a judging function, it's not an introspection that's going to give you a lot of insights. It's an introspection that's going to give you a judgment on things. So, for example, if you take the example of the pen, the introverted thinker might say, this is a wrong pen, for example. The extroverted thinker is gonna say, this is how it works, and this is how we can improve it. And the introverted thinker, since it analyzes the internal framework that it has about the pen, the internal image that it made subjectively about the pen, it's going to say something, for example, as, I don't like that pen. Now, I don't like would be a feeling judgment, since it's logical. It's a wrong pen. This pen shouldn't be done this way. It doesn't work properly. And if you ask them to tell why, they are not the best people to explain you why, unless you want them to explain you all their internal framework about that, you know, how they think and all their life and what led them to think that this is the wrong pen. Because extroverted thinkers can tell you this is a wrong pen because here's how it works, and you see when the ink goes down, it doesn't go as fast as it should, or something like that. But introverted thinkers, they cannot do that. They have this. When a function is introverted, it doesn't analyze the external things. It analyzes the internal things. So since these things in themselves are not necessarily obvious to the user, imagine how difficult it could be to understand an analysis that is based on something you don't even know what it is. What is. So they have internal judgments, subjective, about things, and they have that smooth outlook on life because, you know, they're not externally based, they are internally based, so they don't want to change the world. They only have, for example, you have an idea. You are an INTJ or an ENTJ, you have an idea, you want to express that idea, you want to change the world, you really think this idea is gonna work. Since the INTP is not concerned about the idea itself, but is his subjective perception of the idea, he is going to judge not necessarily your idea based on what it is, but what he thinks of what it is. And he's going to say something, for example, like, that's not gonna work because, how can you even do that? You cannot make people fly in the sky, it won't work because the energy at the current the technology at the current moment is not sufficient to make that possible, etc., etc. So as you see, it looks like what an ISTJ would say, and what you will see sometimes it is that ISTJs, INTPs, in some way are I just saw that I forgot to put the lighting on. INTPs in some way are quirky ISTJs, you could say, almost, because they have, but I will say it in the next part, in one of the next parts, they have that introverted sensing tertiary that leads them in some way to have that stability in life, and you mix that with the dominant introverted thinking, which in itself doesn't want to have an impact on the world, and you get an individual that is quite calm in some way, quite stable, quite routine oriented, almost like the ISTJs, because for some reason when you switch the types, you always keep the judging letters, so they don't look like ISFJs, even though they have the same functions. They look like ISTJs in some way. Some INTPs could look like ISTJs, and some ISTJs could look like INTPs. So when you have a TI dominant function, you, at the opposite of the ENTJ, for example, who has a dominant extroverted thinking function, you don't judge things externally based on external factors, will it work or not. You judge the thing on what you think of it internally. It's a subjective function. It's an extroverted function, which means that it's based on your subjective, I wouldn't say feelings, because it's a judging logical function, it's a T, but you base it on your internal framework of ideas. And most of the time, even though they are coherent with their own framework, their judgments, the judgments they make on external things are not accurate, because they only consider what they already know, while an ENTJ, for example, will consider pretty much everything. You give me new data and I will change my mind. But an INTP doesn't work like that. You give them new data, but it doesn't fit with their internal framework. They have a subject. Introverted functions not only are subjective, but they are also slower than extroverted functions. Extroverted functions react spontaneously when they have new data, whatever the data is, while introverted functions take a certain time to, it's like the activation function. Yes, the activation function of, for those of you who know neural networks, you have, or even the functioning of a neuron in itself, you have the activation function when the energy, the signal that comes, is over a certain level. What you call the activation function will activate itself and send the signal to the other neurons. And you can say it's almost the same thing with an introverted function. When the signal is strong enough, then the introverted function will update its viewpoint on things, but otherwise it won't. So INTPs have a very stable outlook on life, you could say, because of this TI. So that would be TI dominance. I don't know if I said everything about TI. I'm not an expert on that because myself I don't use that function, and I've read a lot about this. But you know, it's introverted functions are always hard to understand because at the opposite of extroverted functions, which are interested by objective facts which are external to you, introverted functions are interested by what you already have in your head. And what is an internal framework that you already have in your head that isn't an opinion and it isn't a feeling, but it's a logical point of view on things? Well, it's hard to describe, but that would be TI. So INTPs are very oh, it's already 11 minutes. I'm gonna try to do it a little bit, to go a little bit quicker, faster, whatever. So INTPs, because of that introverted thinking, they are very slow moving. For example, there is the character. If you're not interested in what I say and you think it's too slow, you can accelerate the video. But I have to say some things that come to my mind when I talk. For example, you have the character Dexter from the series Dexter, the same name as the character. Someone told me actually he was an INTP, and even though most people say he's an ISTJ, which makes total sense to me, INTP is not completely nonsense at the same time. And you see, that's because INTPs can be very flat. Actually, I know an INTP at my work, and even though you can easily differentiate him from an ISTJ because he doesn't have the same practicality ISTJs have. He's not a judger, he's not an extroverted thinker, but he has the same routine-oriented attitude, you know. And the combo TI-SI is very much like the functioning combo of the ISTJ. That's what I wanted to say. Anyway, so now ENTPs are completely different, because I mean really ENTPs, those that favor NE over TI, okay? Because there are ENTPs who are actually INTPs and vice versa. I'm talking about the real ENTPs, the ones of the description. ENTPs have extroverted intuition first, which means a lot of people will tell you it's looking for possibilities, it's reading between the lines, etc., etc. Yeah, this is really caricatural. If you want to go deep in the function, what is extroverted intuition? Extroverted intuition is just like introverted intuition, but it's based on the external facts, the external, not necessarily the external facts, the external data, whatever the data is. It can be, it can also be a feeling. Someone tells me something, and I use my extroverted intuition to deal with that thing, which isn't a fact, it's a data, whatever the thing is. So what is extroverted intuition when it's placed at the dominant position? It means that the person has many the person sees many things. When you have introverted intuition, you're only concerned about the subjective analysis of your intuitive insights about the things, which for some reason that I don't really understand, usually leads to one single focus point. When the same functioning applies to the extroverted intuition, you have multiple. It's like it's fast moving in some way. It's only focused on one thing at a time, and it's fast moving. So they have usually a long trail of information in their mind, a long trail of things they want to talk about, and they can't really focus on all the time on all the things at the same time, because humans can do that. So they will usually talk fast, and in my experience, ENTPs talk fast. Not always, but at least even if they don't talk fast, they have, that they have a lot of things to say at the moment they say it. But it's not like an ENTJ who's only wanting to state facts, fact after fact, etc., to lead to a certain point. It's only to just say what they think. Compare that to INTJs. Sometimes it's easy to compare to another type to understand. INTJs, I compare to INTJs because they're literally the opposite. They are the shadow representation of the ENTP. Every function is flipped. INTJs are very focused on one thing, and they want to express it concretely through extroverted thinking to apply it to the real world. They're gonna objectify everything they say. You flip that and you have ENTPs. ENTPs have a lot of ideas. They don't necessarily want to objectify them. They don't necessarily want them to be concrete and applicable, but they want you to think of these ideas, to at least acknowledge and realize that these possibilities exist. That's why they are called the debater typically, because even though they don't necessarily want to go somewhere, which is the whole point of a debate, you just talk, they have a lot of things to talk about. So you see, it's completely different from INTPs. I was describing INTPs as very calm individuals that can look like ISTJs sometimes, and on the other hand you have a completely different type, which is the ENTP. And the ENTP is ENTPs sometimes can look like ENFJs, I think. ENFJs? Yes, I think they can look like ENFJs. So what I said was wrong. I said that the T for some reason is always kept. No, it's not actually the case. So yes, ENTPs can look like ENFJs. I don't know why. I'm not saying, this is not a rule I'm trying to use. I'm not saying, you switch the first letter or the second one. It's not. This is not a rule. This is only based on my personal experience. I noticed that INTPs can look like ISTJs. I noticed that ENTPs can look like ENFJs. For example, you have the character Leon from Resident Evil. I don't know if you know Resident Evil, but you have that character, and typically I'm referring to the one of the fourth opus, the Resident Evil 4. And Leon, well, typically, what is that guy? Some people would say ENTP, some people would say ENFJ. I have also seen a lot of other typings, but typically these are the ones I've seen the most. And you see, sometimes you can take ENTPs for ENFJs and vice versa. Why? I don't know why, but it's the case. So since ENTP, yes, I know the why could be that sometimes as ENTPs want to debate and they have extroverted feeling, they can be very enthusiastic about what they say, and you can think they are feelers. And since they have that quirkiness that also INTPs have, but much, much, much less, you can think they are interested in you, or maybe they like you, or maybe things like that. And some people think this is ENFJs, while ENFJs are completely different. ENFJs are much more superficially inclined and much more less perceiving and more judging, which in itself, at least for that type, is a defect in my opinion. It's a flaw. because ENFJs, most of the time, they are very arrogant people, I would say. ESFJs and ENFJs think they know better than other people, while actually they don't know anything. I mean, they are dominant extroverted feelers. What do we want to know? I mean, the logical part of their personality is totally inexistent. And the only function they have is completely internally oriented, which means that basically they don't even have the ability to think. Yeah, so that was extroverted intuition. Maybe a little bit more because I said a lot on INTPs. I didn't say a lot on ENTPs. Extroverted intuition. Yes, I said it has a lot of ideas, but there is something about connection. In intuitive functions, you can say there is something about connection, because in some way, and this is debatable, of course, you will never really know, or maybe you will, I don't know. You can say that the functions, the intuitive functions at least, they connect many pieces of information to create a new information. So if introverted intuition connects a lot of subjective information that were internalized about things, extroverted intuition connects concrete things that you see in the world. That's why ENTPs are caricaturally described also as the debater, but you can also say the inventor. Typically, there are many descriptions who call them the inventor, because they will take one thing, they will take another thing, and they will mix them. And this is extroverted intuition at work. You see two concepts. These are not only objects, they are concepts. I don't know how extroverted intuition completely works, but I think that's what they see. They see two concepts, and they think it would be interesting with their TI, with their introverted thinking. We know introverted thinking thinks internally and says and comes up with this idea that it could be interesting to mix these two things just to see what will happen. So this is why they are also called the inventor, because they sometimes not necessarily they want to invent something. For example, you have Iron Man, which I don't know what is Iron Man, because depending on the comic you read, he's written differently. But I'm basing my typing on the movies one, the one with Robert Downey Jr. And this Iron Man is 100% ENTP. Why? Well, because he's exactly like what I described. The only reason why he invented his suit was because he thought it was a good idea, or it would be cool if... I actually don't even remember why. In the first, I think he invented it when he was trapped in a cave, but whatever. The thing is, his new inventions, if you look Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3, etc., all his inventions are pretty much useless. He only invents them because it would be cool, because he's curious about how it would work, etc., etc. And this is extroverted intuition. INTPs, actually, if you take an INTP, a famous INTP like Linus Torvalds, the guy who invented Linux. As you see, Linux is a very useful software. It's an operating system. It's a very concrete thing. You can use it. It's perfect. It's perfect. It's the one of the direct concurrents of Windows and Mac OS. And this is a TI invention. When you compare that to all the inventions, the prolific inventions of useless in some way of Iron Man, you have extroverted intuitive inventions. So you see, there is a difference. There is a difference. Some people will say, I don't know which one I am, but if you compare these two, they are, in some way, they are to some point they're different. So I think that's all I have to say on dominant TI versus dominant NE.